Despite my immersion in Showa-era Godzilla movies and other tokusatsu special effects films by Toho Studios, I have to admit that I haven't really caught the bug for many other giant monsters. There's King Kong, of course, which I've spoken about many times, and I like several Hollywood giant monster movies well enough. But is anybody really a fan of the giant behemoth or the 50-foot woman like they're a fan of Godzilla? Attack the 50-Foot Woman, Gorgo, Them, and its kin are all fine enough films, but stand alone and aloof to any franchise. Back in Japan, I loved the series Ultra Q, created by Godzilla's special effects maestro Eiji Tsuburaya as a kind of hybrid of Godzilla, The Twilight Zone, and the British Avengers series. And I like its spin-off Ultraman well enough, but wasn't so enamored with it that I'd care to catch up on over 50 years of the franchise in all its iterations. I never caught the bug for Super Sentai or Gamera. Not that I haven't tried to understand the appeal of Gamera, but it's never quite clicked with me. However, Gamera's studio Daiei did make another kaiju franchise that did click with me. Daimajin, a strange series of 3 movies released in a single year, and virtually nothing else, but nonetheless compellingly steeped in the 2 great genres to come out of Japan, tokusatsu effects films and jidaigeki samurai dramas. Part of the charm of Showa-era Godzilla films that has been growing on me is the nostalgic setting of post-war Japan. It's fascinating to see how hip and groovy mid-century modernity expressed itself in a country other than the United States or Great Britain, and how that blended with Japanese traditions predating either World War. But the mid-century is a relatively recent interest of mine, in both senses of the word, a thing I've only recently become interested in, and the most historically recent thing I have become interested in. My heart really lies in the pre-World War II eras, the interwar years of the 20s and 30s, the Victorian and Edwardian periods, even back to the Middle Ages. In the case of Japan, that translates primarily to the feudal Edo period and the sweeping transformations of the Meiji and Taisho periods. Neither of those eras are really that conducive to Godzilla. He's a creature born of the atomic bomb and nuclear anxiety. Some parts of the franchise have tried to backdate Godzilla to the Edo period, a Singular Point and the backstory to the Godzilla attraction on Waji Island mainly, but they always feel a little off. Something I've been loving are the few instances of Godzilla projected back to a retro Showa setting, such as the other Godzilla attraction at the Seibuen Showa-themed amusement park, or the opening to the 2007 film Always Sunset on 3rd Street 2, itself a retro Showa-era historical drama series. Japan's feudal era of samurai and geisha, castles and daimyo, is too rich to go fully kaiju-less, however, and that is where Daimajin comes in. A kaiju mythology perfectly situated in the jidaigeki genre, and my favorite kaiju franchise outside of Toho Studios. But strangely, a franchise that didn't get much mileage beyond its initial trilogy. However, a closer look at its 3 films reveals why that might be. All 3 Daimajin films were shot back-to-back in the same quarry and released in 1966. The first Daimajin, released in April 1966, opens with a fiendish coup on the evening of the Majin Festival. The Majin is an evil spirit subdued by God, who is appeased with the annual ritual dramatization of the Majin's conquest and imprisonment beneath a stone effigy in the mountains. Majin is Japanese for magical being or demonic being, comparable to how Gaijin means foreign person, with connotations of barbarism. Unfortunately, the local feudal lord Hanabasa is usurped and killed by his chamberlain Samanosuke, forcing the child prince and princess to flee with a loyal samurai. The new regime outlaws the old rituals, so the priestess and samurai take the heirs to the throne into hiding on the Majin's mountain, in the shadow of the great stone effigy. The story proceeds in much the normal way of a jidaigeki. The new lord is corrupt and totalitarian, creating misery for years that eventually draws out the now-grown children of Hanabasa. Upon their oppression and injustice, they heap the added offense of trying to destroy the Majin statue. When the Hanabasa princess pledges a willingness to sacrifice her own life to bring about the Majin's wrath on Samanosuke, he awakens and goes on a rampage. Well, more of a vengeful stroll through the castle. The second film, Daimajin Ikaru, or Return of Daimajin, released in August 1966, tells of a violent clan who invades its neighboring lands. These two peaceful lands, Chigusa and Nagoshi, surround a crater lake in the middle of which lies an island that is home to another Majin statue. Refugees seek out the statue, the villains find it and destroy it, another princess pledges her life, and Daimajin awakens again to destroy the enemies of peace. Finally came Daimajin Gyakushu, or Daimajin Strikes Again, released in December 1966. This time, the conflict revolves around a village whose people are being taken by Lord Arakawa to work in the sulfur mines of his gunpowder operation. Between the village and Arakawa's domain lies the Majin's Mountain. Ordinarily, this is a cursed area, but a woodcutter from the village escapes through it to bring news to the village about their men's fates. A quartet of boys strike out to cross the mountain and find their respective brothers and fathers, despite warnings from a priestess in the woods that the Majin's Mountain comes with a curse. 3 of the 4 boys die under various circumstances, leading the 4th to sacrifice his own life jumping off a cliff to summon forth Daimajin. The Daimajin himself is an excellent design and an excellent concept. Instead of an atomic horror, he is one of the pantheon of fearsome, awe-inspiring deities and supernatural entities that reside within Japan's wealth of temples and stories. He was particularly inspired by the Neomon guardian statues that flank the entries of Buddhist temples. He was also inspired by Kirk Douglas. Believe it or not, the director of the first film, Kimiyoshi Yasuda, specifically requested that Daimajin have a Kirk Douglas-like cleft in his chin. The armor worn by Daimajin clearly resembles the Hanawa statues of the Yamato period. The Hanawa were terracotta statues depicting men, women, soldiers, and livestock that were enclosed in the graves of the period. He almost exactly resembles a famous Hanawa statue in the Tokyo National Museum, depicted with Keiko-style armor from the 6th century CE. The Yamato period, dating approximately 250 CE to 710 CE, is generally regarded as the birth of historical Japan. In fact, Toho made a film about it, called The Birth of Japan, or The Three Treasures, in 1959, and starring Toshiro Mifune as Prince Yamato. Prior to the Yamato period was the Yayoi period, when agriculturalists from the Korean peninsula migrated into Japan around 1000 to 300 BCE, blending with or displacing the hunter-gatherer Jomon people, who had been there since approximately 14,000 BCE. The Yayoi agriculturalists eventually consolidated power in increasingly wealthy and socially stratified kingdoms through the 300s and 400s CE, heavily influenced by Chinese and Korean politics, arts, technology, Confucianism, and Buddhism, culminating in the Yamato emperors conquering the rest of the country from their seat of power in the Nara region from 538 CE onward. Ever since, the name Yamato has been a synonym for Japan itself, including the World War II battleship Yamato, and its anime successor, the space battleship Yamato. So there is a sense here in which Daimajin might represent something fairly primal and foundational in Japanese culture. It's never entirely clear what Daimajin is, but I think my description of him as a malevolent supernatural entity who was subdued, but whose wrath can be unleashed for purposes of virtuous revenge, is a pretty solid interpretation. Whatever exactly he is, it is evident that what motivates him is injustice perpetrated to such a degree that someone is willing to sacrifice their own life in a desperate plea to gain Daimajin's attention. Thus inspired, the Majin spirit enters the stone effigy and mobilizes it, stomping his way through Edo-era castles, and the exact same quarry in every film. Unfortunately, such unleashed wrath cannot be easily subdued. Once the perpetrators of the injustice have been destroyed, Daimajin is ready to keep going and destroy the whole world. Only sincere thanks, sometimes expressed through a willingness to sacrifice oneself to stand in his way, will turn the avenger from his anger. Thus moved or satisfied, he will disappear in the form of some element, crumbling into dust in the first film, disintegrating into water in the second, and blowing away as snow in the third. This end suggests an almost elemental aspect to Daimajin, which might also reflect Japan's Shinto heritage. Though generating in a stone effigy, he is connected in some way with a central element in each film: the stone mountains that offer refuge, the crater lake that lies between the invaded lands, and the forbidding snowy peaks. The prologue to the third film even depicts the Majin, in the misty lost days of Japan's distant past, as a spirit of elemental chaos. He causes the earth to tremble and the floods to come, until he is locked away in his stone effigy. Daimajin has, I think, some of the most interesting layers and depths of symbolic meaning of any kaiju. Chthonic elemental forces of anger and vengeance unleashed, and yet harnessed, by sacrifice, into justice. Each individual film is also engaging as a jidaigeki drama, steeped in the forms and tropes of the genre. The themes of sacrificial justice are common in samurai films. That is both the series' blessing and its curse, perhaps leading to why there were no further Daimajin films, properly speaking, after the original 1966 trilogy. One could easily imagine how each of the Daimajin films could have been resolved as simply a samurai film, without recourse to giant supernatural monsters to round out the third act. While the presence of Daimajin as an entity is flushed throughout the films, he's not an active personality until the climax, when he goes on his rampage. In each film, that is perfectly fine, but a weakness is exposed when viewing all three films in rapid succession. The trilogy fell into an apparent crippling pattern, where you take any standard jidaigeki story of oppression and throw Daimajin in at the end. Again, that's not bad, but it limited the overall life of the franchise. The films are each compelling and well done, but it would be hard to imagine that same pattern carrying on for 5 films, or 10, or 25. To have survived, it would have had to become more innovative, find ways to interject Daimajin into a wider variety of feudal Japanese stories. But then, at what point are you just rewriting any given samurai movie script to have Daimajin in it at the end? As it was, Daimajin quietly went to sleep and did not rise again until the 2010 TV series Daimajin Canon, set in modern-day Japan, with a heartbroken girl who must relearn to sing her family's ancestral song with all her heart, because on that song's calling out to Daimajin rests the fate of the world. Most recently, Daimajin appeared in Takashi Miike's Great Yokai War Guardians in 2021. This was a sequel to 2005's The Great Yokai War, which was itself a reboot of Daiei's Yokai Monsters trilogy of films released in 1968 and 69. Yokai Monsters is another series blending tokusatsu and jidaigeki that will warrant its own video, focused on the human-scale monsters of Japanese folklore. But with both Daimajin and Yokai Monsters being tokusatsu jidaigeki and being made by Daiei, they seemed a natural enough pair to link together. In the film, Daimajin is raised to fight the gigantic Yokaiju. But, if you want to see kaiju stomping around in feudal Japan, the original Daimajin trilogy is where it's at. And about all there is. But it's not bad to have a genre all wrapped up to yourself.